am Zunaira Azhar, and you are watching Epicenter, where we dissect, analyze, and define major domestic and global stories. As the dust settles down after the government formation in Pakistan, a new kind of political reality has emerged, but with almost the same political actors and the faces. In this equation, Pakistan People's Party is believed to have taken a center stage, has become more relevant, yet they are engaging with their ally PMLN with a lot of caution. Presumably, Pakistan People's Party might also prove to be a buffer zone between many disgruntled political entities in the times to come. Let's talk of PTI. It is back in the parliament with a very sizable presence, and somewhat new faces have emerged without the previous top tier leadership. As for PMLN, this is a godsend opportunity. They must realize that they are at an inflection point when it comes to their political reality and future. That said, the question remains whether this new equation has the capacity and capability to address the politico-economic urgency that the country is facing at the moment. To discuss this, we have a panel of guests with us who will join us as the story develops. For now, I have been joined by Fahad Hussain, a seasoned journalist and an avid political commentator. Fahad, thank you so much for joining us. Well, now that the PM is in office and he has been talking about a 5-year plan for the revisionist kind of an economy and economic model and stuff that we have been hearing in 90s and 80s. The 5-year development plan, what new are you watching this time?
Thank you so much, Zunaira. Well, I mean, I think more than new, what we're looking at is some policies which bring an element of stability in our economy. You know, given the fact that the last 2 years or 3 years or perhaps even more have been so turbulent in terms of our politics and the seesaw of our economic policies and the fact that we nearly defaulted a year ago. All of that now focuses on one fundamental, simple, and I think most important thing, which is an element of semblance of stability, which allows both internal, domestic and international investors to at least say that Pakistan is stabilizing. So currently, right now, I think the most important thing for the new government is to go into the IMF program, which is under negotiation, or at least the last tranche of it, which is $1.1 billion, I believe. And then immediately after that, to go into the actual 3-year new program, which still has to be negotiated. Because I think if we can enter into an IMF program at this stage, at the minimum what it would do is it would send a signal to the international community, to the investors and to everybody else that Pakistan is at least now settling down into some sort of a economic rhythm. So I think that's the most important thing.
All right, but first week of Shehbaz Sharif actually working with his cabinet, and the energy minister has been changed. Malick has been replaced by Awais Loghari. How do you look at it?
Well, obviously, it doesn't look very good when such decisions are changed in so quickly after they've been announced. But I think we shouldn't read too much into it. I think more than the economic factor, it is a political factor which came into play. The portfolio has changed. But I would say that, of course, Dr. Malick is one of the most competent people in the cabinet. But Mr. Awais Loghari is also, a very experienced politician and who's served on the cabinet many times. So I think it's a little slight political jolt for the government to be changing decisions so quickly, but I think things will settle down.
Well, that's what we were talking about, this capacity and capability conundrum, because I think this change of faces might continue because this is an allied government anyway. What do you think of the 7 ordinances that were being tabled this last week? Because I thought that the government has the right numbers, then why resort to ordinances?
I think that's a good question, and whenever legislation is done through the ordinances, it reflects badly on the government. Again, I think we all know that the whole concept of ordinances is there to ensure that there are no unnecessary delays in legislation when such legislation is required to be passed when the National Assembly is not in session. So while it is in session, ordinance just become a convenience that all governments resort to. So clearly it does not look good, but I think at this particular stage, from what I can understand, the new government is in a rush to move forward quickly on economic matters, and I think that is one of the reasons why they're pushing through ordinances without having to wait through the normal process, tedious process often of going through the National Assembly, tabling a bill, having a debate on it, perhaps sending it to the committees and then finally voting on them. So I think speed dictates this, but I agree with you, the optics are not good.
Yeah, because in the weakest of the democracies, it is said that you resort to ordinances. Also, we have seen the behavior of Pakistan People's Party when the ordinances were tabled. They were the first to oppose it, but later on they resorted to, supporting the government. And this is exactly the behavior that we witnessed in the last PDM government. Do you think it is going to continue like this?
Well, hard to say. I think it will depend on how quickly the government becomes comfortable with legislation. We've already seen that the People's Party has very clearly, vocalized its reservations about certain appointments. It was able to do that both on the floor of the National Assembly, otherwise also. So I think that signals to the government that People's Party is not going to take things lying down, which is what makes this running of this coalition a little tough, and that's why I think there will probably need to be greater focus on and more consultation between the cabinet, the PMLN-led cabinet, and the People's Party, which is not part of the cabinet. That consultation has not happened in at least one case, the appointment of the IRSA chief, which had to be reversed. So I think legislation is going to be not too difficult as long as People's Party is on board, but I think the government will really need to work hard to make sure that the People's Party is on board in terms of legislation before that legislation is brought before the parliament.
Well, we both know that Pakistan People's Party is making a very cautious move, not taking any seat at the cabinet. But do you think it's going to be an impediment when it comes to consensus on the legislation? Because if you're not sitting in the cabinet meetings, you're not abreast with what is happening, how are you going to vote on something or oppose something in the parliament?
In fact, that is the key challenge now for the cabinet and for the PMLN government. They have to make sure that they have proper, in-depth, frank and honest consultations with the People's Party before they move to the parliament for any kind of legislation. This will require a lot of patience, because on some very important issues the People's Party has a difference of opinion. For example, privatization. For example, NFC. For example, for sure, the 18th Amendment. Now, of course, 18th Amendment is not under review at all, but there have been some whispers about relooking at it. But the NFC award, of course, has been a topic of conversation, and the Pakistan People's Party is absolutely clear that it is not interested in any form of review or changing of the NFC. So whatever legislation has to come forward, I think the PMLN will require a lot of time to ensure that the People's Party is on board, because one thing that the PMLN government cannot afford is to bring about a legislation and then have it shot down because the People's Party was not agreed to it. Legislation by consensus is what the PMLN would like to do, but it's going to take a lot of working closely with the People's Party.
Do you think there has to be a focal person from both sides before tabling the further legislation bills or whatever is there coming out in the parliament? Wouldn't it be viable to have one focal person at least who is acting as a bridge between the two parties?
Well, remember that in the previous government, PDM government, People's Party and the PMLN were together in the cabinet. So there is a channel of communication, there is a certain level of working relationship. There are people within the People's Party, many of them who were part of the cabinet, who have an excellent working relationship with Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, who work together on his team. So I don't think there is communication or consultation or sitting together and discussing legislation should be a problem. This is not the 90s when the People's Party and the PLN were at loggerheads. These are different times, so it is doable. But also remember that there is a reason why Pakistan People's Party is not part of the cabinet. And the reason is that they don't really want to take ownership of the decisions that the cabinet is making. That said, it doesn't mean that they will not go along with the legislation that they feel is important. Now that's where the real challenge comes in. So I don't think it's a matter of one person or two person. I think it's more of a teamwork which has to be spearheaded by the Prime Minister and his core team to make sure that the People's Party leadership is on board when it comes to important pieces of legislation.
Right. Well, let's move on to PTI. They are opposing almost everything in the parliament, and that is something that they really do very well. They are so good at opposition. Let's take a break here, then continue with the discussion. Welcome to Epicenter once again, and let's dive into the same discussion once again that was happening before the break. Fahad, I was talking about PTI. They have been opposing these bills as well in the National Assembly, forgetting that the ordinances were in bulk while they were in government. At the moment, the things at question is their protest outside the IMF headquarters in Washington. How do you look at that?
I look at it very negatively. I think they should not have done that. It sends it's an absolutely wrong signal, not just to the IMF, but to the international community and specifically to our domestic audience. Because remember, PTI has its grievances. They are genuine. Many of them are genuine. One cannot dispute that. But having reservations or having grievances against something to do with domestic politics and then venting them at a venue in front of an organization that has to give a loan to Pakistan, a loan that is essential for Pakistan. These are two absolutely different things. So I think in many ways the PTI has crossed a red line. It should not have. But remember, this is not the first time. They've already done so earlier. They've written a letter to the IMF. They've also done a bunch of other stuff which is extremely irresponsible, and I think for all stakeholders it sends a very negative signal. The signal that I'm reading is, and what the PTI seems to be suggesting is that if we are not in power, if we are not in government, if our leader is not the Prime Minister, then everything trumps that, including Pakistan's interests. So it was a horribly irresponsible thing to do, and I hope that the PTI realize that whatever they're doing is harming them instead of benefiting them.
Is this a result of kind of a leadership crisis that they are facing? Because looking at this last week, there have been different statements from different people and nobody knows who is the actual focal person coming from PTI's chairman, former chairman Imran Khan. Is this the result of the leadership crisis, that things are happening that are going out of hand for PTI?
I don't think this is directly the result of that crisis. The crisis is very much there. There are no two ways about it. There is confusion because the access to Mr. Imran Khan is limited. So there is a lot of parallel decision making going on. The second line of leadership is undercutting each other. Even today we've heard some very senior PTI people saying that the lawyers should not be taking political decisions. So all of that is happening. But when it comes to this protest against the IMF, we've heard Mr. Imran Khan tell journalists only yesterday that protest was absolutely justified and he was happy that it was done. So on this particular thing, I think the leader himself is either giving the line or wanting this done or justified. That absolutely deliberate. Absolutely.
All right.
There are no two ways about that.
All right, we have been joined by Khurram Hussain, a business and journalist, someone who writes so clearly on economy that you don't have to be a student of economy to understand that. Welcome to this show, Khurram. And diving right into the discussion that we were having before you, IMF has started the negotiation with NFC Awards. And a lot of people want to understand, where does the line draws? That is this a hardcore restructuring thing that they are demanding, or is this a meddling in the internal affairs of the country? How do you look at it?
Well, I don't think we can call it meddling in the internal affairs of the country. The IMF has flagged the NFC award even as far back as 2013 in their Article 4 report, where they had an entire section dedicated to it. And even in that section, they talked about revamping the award. That's the word they used. The word used recently in the headline of a newspaper is revisit. So I'm not sure what the difference between those two is. But if we look at the last time the IMF talked about revamping the NFC award, it didn't really mean that go ahead and start rolling back the provincial shares in the NFC award. They didn't come out and say that so clearly, but they did say that you need a better balance between expenditure and revenue responsibilities. Because currently all the major revenue lines lie with the government, whereas a lot of the expenditure responsibilities have been devolved downwards. And that's creating a bit of a mismatch, where the federal government does the revenue collection and the provincial governments do much of the social sector spending and much of the other spending associated with it. What they were asking for was a better alignment. They said either get the get the provincial governments to mobilize their revenue lines and their revenue shares, or devolve the responsibilities in such a way that there's a better match between revenues and expenditures. But they did not say that there should be a rolling back of. What's not clear is the substance of the conversations that really took place between the government and the IMF. I don't think it's likely that the IMF told the government something like, you must you must change the provincial allocations and you must pass the associated legislation that goes with it. I think what they would more likely have said is that the NFC award and the kind of the lack of balance between expenditure and revenue assignments is creating or is at the root of a lot of your fiscal troubles. You need to look at that more carefully. And by the way, revisit the NFC award can also mean just hold a meeting at least of the NFC commission. Because right now, I don't think one meeting has been held since at least, I think 2019 or something was the last time it was held. One was not held during the Imran Khan, the days of the Imran Khan government or the first PDM government that came in after the vote of no confidence. So even that would be a step forward. If there can at least be a meeting of the NFC Commission, in which the federal government can show up and say, look, we have a problem, and then look for a way within the permissible framework of the NFC to see if they can find redressals and work with the provinces on that. So I would hold back a little bit on leaping to conclusions about what exactly revisit the NFC award actually meant.
Yeah, I ask this because this is a constitutionally agreed framework as an internal thing of Pakistan, and revisiting it, whatever it means, raises certain questions, and I just wanted to have your take on it. A CEO of Pakistan's largest bank has been tapped recently as a finance minister, and this is not the first time that someone from abroad has been brought in as a minister for finance. What is different this time?
That's a good question. I think we're all waiting to see what is going to be different this time. Some of the things on the surface that are different is that Mohammad Aurangzeb is more of a banker's banker, in the sense that his core expertise actually lies in the financial side of the banking profession. The bankers that we brought in previously, whether Shaukat Tareen or even Shaukat Aziz, were not really those with the financial expertise that goes with banking, number one. Number two, Mohammad Aurangzeb is known to have, as far as his connections with HPL, growing out of his leadership at HPL, extensive connections in China, for example, in the Chinese government. You'll recall HPL was the first Pakistani bank to actually begin operations in China as well. They've moved much further down the road out of all other Pakistani banks in building a network among the Chinese financial system. And in his earliest press remarks given to the media, he did speak about floating a panda bond, for example. Now, this is not the first time that somebody has talked about floating panda bonds, which are bonds floated in Chinese financial markets to tap Chinese capital for government of Pakistan purposes. So, this time round, it's looking like at least some kind of hardcore financial expertise is there in the driving seat. But, whether or not this actually translates into any different kind of economic governance or not, we'll have to wait to find out, because I think the pressures that Mohammad Aurangzeb will have to balance out. He's got a fractious coalition to manage. He's got a civil military equation that
internal realities of Pakistan.
Realities are actually, very complicated, and that is going to impact the character of economic governance that he can bring, and those are things he's going to have to balance out, and that will take some amount of political skill, something that he has not been tested on so far in the course of his 30-year-long career. So I think we'll have to wait to find out the real answer to your question.
All right. Fahad, someone must have heard well when Khurram said in one of his columns that the last thing Pakistan needs is Ishaq Dar as the finance minister. And now my question to you is, with this new finance minister in place, what is this economic diplomacy buzz coming from Foreign Office? Because Ishaq Dar is holding a lot of activities over there regarding the outsourcing of airports, for example. Is it going to be a conflict between the two? Ishaq Dar would continue to be the shadow finance minister, or what?
Well, as Khurram just said, that it will require a lot of deft political maneuvering by Mr. Aurangzeb to be able to operate as he would like to. And the reason why I think that is important is because this is the first time that Mr. Aurangzeb is working in the government, and that too at this level. And he's working within a cabinet which has people who are connected to all sorts of power centers in all sorts of different and interesting ways. So I think one of the key factors that would ensure that Mr. Aurangzeb is effective as a finance minister would be the kind of political support, political backing that he continues to enjoy from the Prime Minister, from the cabinet, and from the ruling party as a whole. Now, the last part is important, because I think from the Prime Minister there is no doubt that he will have all the support. It is because of the Prime Minister that he is where he is today. From the cabinet also, I think he will get the kind of support, because I think the Prime Minister's policy tends to percolate through the cabinet very easily. But when it comes to having the kind of support that he requires from within the rank and file of the ruling party, that's where things could get a little complicated. And I think your talk about Foreign Office and Ishaq Dar as the foreign minister, and him holding meetings on topics, on issues which normally one wouldn't see a foreign minister doing, does indicate that his heart is probably still in the finance ministry, and that's going to be a challenge. So I think that is a challenge that is that belongs less to the finance minister and more to his bosses. They have to ensure that he is given the space that he requires, and that he is not constantly looking over his shoulder, and that he is not being constantly second guessed, or there's nobody who's doing backseat driving. He requires that space, and unless he has that, he is constantly going to be finding it difficult to push forward the kind of policies or reforms that he wants to. So absolutely, it is an economic challenge that is there in front of all of us, But for him, I think it is also a political challenge, and I really hope that this government and this Prime Minister and this ruling party can overcome this political challenge and give Mr. Aurangzeb the kind of political space that he requires to do his work.
Khurram, same question to you. Do you see a rift, an internal rift between the two, the finance minister and the foreign minister?
I sincerely hope not. As this government moves forward, both of these men are going to have to find ways to work together if they are to achieve their objectives. The work of the finance and the foreign ministries comes, dovetails on important occasions. Miftah Ismail, for example, who was finance minister from about April 2022 till August of 2022, speaks of how often he had to lean on the office of foreign minister, which was held by Bilawal Bhutto at that time, in order to see key things through. Especially with an IMF program that was really badly stuck and in the doldrums. And he speaks highly of how well Bilawal Bhutto came through for him at that time. That cooperation was quite important and quite critical to reviving the program in August, until of course the program stalled one more time when Mr. Dar came into the finance ministry and thought that he could renegotiate the entire thing. But now I think Mr. Aurangzeb and Mr. Ishaq Dar are going to have to learn to work together in order to address the concerns in the minds of Pakistan's creditors. Those creditors include multilateral, such as the IMF and the World Bank, and particularly the IMF, because a lot hinges on that. It's only when you get the seal of approval from the IMF that all the other creditors begin to unlock their lending lines to you. Once that is accomplished, then the bilateral creditors are next in line. Now that includes the Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, it includes China very significantly. And it's possible it could end up including Qatar in the near future too, because at least the military leadership has been talking since the summer of 2023 of accessing or tapping very large credit lines in the form of investments against assets from the Gulf countries for Pakistan. And that's a role in which the foreign minister is going to have to play, an important part alongside the finance, if that is to happen. And after that, then there come the private creditors, your Eurobond holders, even your Panda bond subscribers, in the event we move towards that. And these guys look very carefully at the political balance within the government to see, well, how stable is the whole setup that we are about to engage with over here, and how well are their relationships with their other creditors, the other class of creditors that they're involved with. And there too, the outcome of how these two men work with each other will have to reflect. So I think on the whole, it's very critical that both of them will have to find a way to supplement and each other's efforts. And very importantly, not allow the question of who's going to take the credit to get in the way between them.
It's a teamwork anyway. It has to be a coherent effort. And so much, Khurram Hussain, for joining us. And coming after the break, we'll be discussing the congressional hearing on Pakistani elections in Washington, D.C. Stay tuned. Welcome to Epicenter once again. And there is going to be a congressional hearing on the future of democracy in Pakistan and Pakistan in the post-election era and Pak-US relationships. And there is this inflection point about it that while the US-Pakistan relationships are really critical, PTI has lobbied really well. Let it be the diaspora, let it be lobbying firms. It is being said that they are successfully making their voices heard in the Congress. I have invited actually Michael Kugelman for this particular segment. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. He's South Asia Director at the Wilson Center and writes for Foreign Policy magazine as well. Michael, welcome to the show. Fahad, before I give the mic to Michael, how do you look at this? Do you think it's a result of the lobbying coming from PTI? Because we have had that letter signed by 30 congressmen previously who suggested to President Biden not to acknowledge this government because there has been rigged elections in Pakistan.
Yes, I do believe that PTI's lobbying has become a major factor in such issues. I don't know the exact details of how this came about, but clearly whatever PTI supporters are doing in the US is having some sort of an impact. Now, is it going to pose very serious problems for the government of Pakistan? If nothing else, it is a cause of embarrassment, and it is something that the government will need to address one way or the other. I think it is also a diplomatic challenge for the government. If they cannot counter these moves by PTI supporters in the US and in other important capitals, then clearly the battle of the narratives that is so important right now for Pakistan's domestic political compulsion and also for the international perception of this government, then that battle is going to start affecting the government adversely. So clearly PTI efforts are bearing fruit in the US at the expense of the government.
Michael, is it normal for a congressional committee to be set up for this kind of an investigation for a particular country with regard to their elections? Is there a precedent out there?
Well, I think you have to look at this in a bit of a broader context. Members of Congress are oftentimes in touch with their constituents, and their constituents will share their views about a variety of things, and then their members respond accordingly. And I think in this case, we're looking at a situation where the Pakistani American community has a very strong, there's a very strong pro-Khan and pro-PTI dimension to it. It's been like that for quite some time, but I think that that's become even more so over the last few years. And I think that this hearing that's being convened is in many ways a reaction to the views of the constituents of members of Congress, and certainly many Pakistani Americans are pro-PTI. There's also formal PTI representation in the United States. That's been the case for a long time. If you go back, quite a few decades, in fact, even when PTI was a relatively new party, there had been a presence of the group here, and there would be fundraising activities and things like that. So the U.S. has long been a pretty strong base for PTI support and PTI activities. So, in looking at why we're seeing this play out now, I think it's a combination of domestic politics playing out in the United States, where members of Congress are responding to what their constituencies would like to see, but also indeed the fact that you have had advocacy from PTI here in the United States to try to get this hearing. So yeah, I do see this hearing as a pretty big victory for PTI. This is what they wanted to see for quite some time.
Is there a precedence that a particular committee for elections in a particular country has been set up previously?
Well, I mean, there are hearings all the time. I mean, this is part of the domestic political process, and so there's all types of different reasons why you have these types of events. I can't speak to. I don't think there's been any type of precedent in a Pakistan-specific context, but certainly, rights and democracy and issues like that. That's certainly something that will attract attention among many on Capitol Hill when it comes to these issues and how they play out overseas. But I don't think we should overstate the significance of this hearing in a broader sense. It certainly is a big deal for PTI. It's going to be a big issue on social media in Pakistan. And of course, the fact that this will probably be the first time that Donald Liu will be asked publicly to respond to questions about this whole cipher case. That's significant in a limited sense, but I don't think we should get carried away about the broader significance of this hearing for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship and for Pakistan more broadly.
Well, that's my next question. Why the sole witness is Donald Liu? The way PTI is looking at it, it's kind of their victory that that one particular person who has been accused of the whole thing is the sole witness in the hearing. Usually the hearings have so many witnesses. Why just Donald Lu, who is like an assistant undersecretary? And I believe there is a big bureau. There could be any other person who could represent his department. Why Donald Lu?
Right. Well, I think that it's actually a good opportunity for the U.S. government and the State Department and for Donald Lu himself to set the record straight on these allegations that the U.S. government has rejected repeatedly again and again. And so I think it's a good opportunity for there to be a public debate, so to speak, where he could be asked questions, he can give his responses, and then move on. Maybe PTI wouldn't be ready to move on, but I think from a U.S. government perspective, they could move on. And again, this is routine practice. This is what happens. This is very common for senior U.S. officials on the executive side of the government in the administration to be asked by members of Congress to testify. It happens very frequently. There have been many hearings on Pakistan and U.S.-Pakistan relations where you have senior officials. But the fact that it's Donald Lu, I think that is a reflection of the influence of PTI and wanting to put him in the hot seat, so to speak. I definitely think that this could have been done differently. You're absolutely right. If you want to have a broad analytical look at the state of democracy in Pakistan, and the state of U.S.-Pakistan relations, you could invite scholars, you can invite analysts, think tankers, whatever the case may be. Now, I'll say this, we don't know, there could be additional witnesses added. Sometimes you have additional witnesses that are added to the panel closer to the event, and still a few days, it's not until Wednesday. So, we can't rule out some other witnesses coming to the table. That wouldn't surprise me. But I don't have any information on whether that's going to happen or not.
Yeah, so far the website says it's only Donald Lu. Fahad, he thinks, well, Michael thinks that PTI might move on after this. Do you think they are going to move on?
Well, I think what Michael suggested, I think from what I could understand, was he was saying that the U.S. government might move on, but the PTI wouldn't. And I don't think the PTI will move on because they haven't moved on. They haven't moved on all these years because this is something that is fueling the narrative that has turned out to be so effective for them. Although we all know that there's hardly any truth in this narrative. The fact that the U.S. has denied it very clearly multiple times just adds to the fact that actually this is something. And by the way, not just the U.S. government, the Pakistani government, Pakistani establishment, GHQ, ISPR, the ambassador, the Pakistani ambassador who was actually in the heart of all of this, everyone has actually very clearly and in very unambiguous terms denied any such conspiracy which involved the U.S. wanting to or actually throwing out the PTI government. So this is basically a political narrative, and I think after this hearing, obviously the U.S. government will move on because a stage will come where I think the U.S. government will stop responding to these allegations. I think it is also a good opportunity. I agree with Michael. It's a good opportunity for the U.S. government to lay it out as clearly as it can, all the other relevant aspects of this political narrative. But I think for the Pakistani government, the present government, the challenge will remain, because as long as the PTI is fueling this narrative through repeated accusations at multiple forums, the Pakistani government will need to counter them one way or the other. And so far, I have not seen a very concerted effort which would suggest, at least to me, that the government is being successful in countering this propaganda coming out from PTI all across the world.
Well, of course, someone has to move on, let it be US government or PTI, because this cannot go on forever. Which brings me to the question, Michael, whosoever we talks to about Pak-US relationship, we hear back that Pakistan is not on the priority list. What do you have to say on this?
Right. In the grand scheme of things, Pakistan is not a top 10 priority for the Biden administration, or for that matter, Capitol Hill, I should say as well. And particularly since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, the U.S. strategic focus on Pakistan has really decreased, I would say. Essentially, what the U.S. government wants to do, and this has been the case ever since 2021, is to reframe the relationship with Pakistan so that it's less focused on Afghanistan issues and security issues more broadly, and more focused around trade and investment cooperation. But U.S. officials will acknowledge it's difficult to do that reset so long as the economy is such a problem, is such a mess in Pakistan. So, from a Washington perspective, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is not in crisis. You don't have any major tension points right now, but it's just not a priority. So I think it's really in a situation where it's things are good, things are stable, but there's no major desire on the part of officials here to try to expand it and bring back strategic dialogue and put it back in the type of status that it was in several decades ago. I mean, it's very clear just because of geopolitics and the way U.S. interests are focused now. Everything revolves around this Indo-Pacific policy, which does not appear to include Pakistan, at least not in a formal sense. Competition with China is the big focus, and of course you have these two big wars and growing destabilization around the world. And I don't think that Pakistan, from a Washington perspective, really plays into that. And that brings me back to the other point that I had made earlier, that we shouldn't put too much emphasis, we shouldn't overstate the significance of this hearing coming up, because it's not Congress that sets policy toward Pakistan or to any country. It's the administration, it's the executive branch.
It's the Oval
And
Office.
so, Congress is convening this hearing, and then after it has the hearing, it'll move on. I mean, that's not to say there won't be additional hearings down the road on this issue. I don't know. But given that it's the administration that drives the relationship with Pakistan, it's going to want to. It's not going to be that impacted by how things play out. It'll be, of course, there'll be interest in seeing how the exchange goes on Capitol Hill and all. But beyond that, the administration has its mind up for what it wants to see in its relationship with Pakistan, and that's not going to be impacted by how things play out on Wednesday.
Okay. Fahad, let it be a PR stunt or whatever this is by PTI. Don't you think our current government needs to engage with the American diaspora more effectively? Because as Michael has put it, there has been PTI ever since like 20, 30 years ago. There have been events over there for raising funds and all that. Do you think there is a need in this government to focus on the American diaspora effectively?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Not just American diaspora, but Pakistani diaspora all over the world. This has been one of the failings of the PMLN and also the People's Party, even in the last government when they had a coalition government, that they've not been able to put together a decent effort to engage with the Pakistani diaspora. Now, there could be a number of issues, number of reasons why this hasn't worked out. One of them could be the absence of a coherent narrative. The other could be the absence of a clear policy in terms of how to engage with the diaspora. There's also the issue of the government utilizing all its diplomatic levers to try and push through a narrative which can not just engage but effectively influence Pakistani diaspora. But it's a difficult thing because the PTI has been at it for a very long time. They've been doing it very well. They have deep penetration within the diaspora. The PTI's message has resonated much more loudly than that of the PMLN or the People's Party. So if this government really wants to take on this challenge, which actually it must, because I don't think it has a choice. So if it really has to do this, it will have to figure out how to put together a policy as well as an entire communication machinery which can link up with the diaspora and try and wean them away from PTI towards them. But it's going to be an uphill task, that much I can tell you.
Yeah. Michael, my last question to you. Whatever outcome we might see of this hearing, do you think that's going to impact Pak-US relations in any way?
I don't. I mean, it is important to acknowledge that Capitol Hill does play a role in foreign policy, even though it doesn't drive it, and that particularly when it comes to things like approving aid packages and things like that. But I don't anticipate all that much legislation coming out on Capitol Hill related to aid to Pakistan, particularly because security assistance to Pakistan has been suspended since early 2018. It was Donald Trump's famous New Year's Day tweet that year when he suspended aid to Pakistan, or that decision came soon after that. So no, I really don't think so. As I had said at the top, this will be a big issue for Pakistan, for PTI, and by extension for domestic politics. But I think that for the relationship, there's not going to be that much that's impacted by it. I will say, just to add to what Fahad said before, it is notable that the Pakistani government, including the Pakistani embassy, the Pakistani ambassador here in Washington, have actually been very engaged with not only with the diaspora but also with Capitol Hill. A lot of meetings that we've seen made very public. They're frequently posted on social media, showing the Pakistani ambassador meeting with diaspora members, meeting with members of Congress, including some members of Congress that have been critical of Pakistan in recent weeks. So that's happening, but it's a very delicate dance for the Pakistani government to carry out, just because indeed significant numbers, if not considerable majorities of the Pakistani American community here in the U.S. Are very pro-Khan, and that's gone back a long time. It's very funny that not funny, it's notable from an anecdotal perspective. I've seen over the years that the two Pakistani leaders that tend to draw the most support from the Pakistani American community here, particularly in Washington, are Imran Khan and earlier on Pervez Musharraf, which is very very interesting. But no, I really don't see any type of major impact for the relationship coming out of this hearing. It's going to be a one-off, and then the two sides, as I had said, will return to what they've already been doing, which at the end of the day is not much. This is a relationship that hasn't really been moving forward all that much over the last few years, but it is stable. It's not tense, and clearly both sides are making the right noises about wanting to figure out ways to engage. But the PTI factor will continue to be a significant one, both in Pakistan and also here in the United States, just because of that large following it has in the U.S. and in so many other countries in the West, such as the U.K. and elsewhere.
Right. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, Fahad Hussain, for being on the show. And this is Zunaira Azhar signing out from Epicenter this week.